it earlier are probably going to join us. So just be aware. I'll handle that. It won't be something that you all need to do anything about. Paulann, take it away.
Thank you, Judy. When Judy first contacted me about being part of your weekly TED Talks, is what she said at first, and I thought, oh, no, I don't think so. But then when we talked about it, I could see she had something a little different in mind. It was an invitation to do something similar to what Kim Stafford did, which was read some poems, as I understand, and then talk about his writing process. Well, the more that Judy and I talked about this, the more I wanted to be able to do something that would lead into your own writing, a chance to get your pens, your pencils onto the page going, which with the hundreds of workshops that I did throughout the state of Oregon, that was one of the joys that I had, which was to lead workshops in public libraries, in Grange halls, in places all over this state, what I call a generative workshop, in that what my goal was, my desire, my love, was to get the people who were there writing their own poems, their own pieces of memoir, maybe short story, novel, whatever it turned out to be. So that's our plan. And we do have 2 sessions set up to do this. What I want to do today is start by reading for you 3 poems that are in this latest book of mine. It's called One Small Sun, and it is from Salmon Poetry in Ireland, although it's readily available on Amazon or from Annie Bloom's or Broadway Books or Powell's, but it is this wonderful Irish publisher. And these poems are lyric poems. I'm a lyric poet, but they are all narrative poems. All the poems in this book have a story to tell. The poem comes to you, meets you, wanting to tell you a story. And so this book is a bit of a departure for me. A few of these kinds of poems have slipped into my other books, my other collections, but this is the first one that I've ever done where all the poems in the book bring stories to you. So I want to read 3 poems from this book, One Small Sun, and they are the poems that Joan sent you ahead of the session. I'm going to start with a poem called Magnolias. This poem is dedicated to my mother. There's an epigraph dedicating the poem to my mother, Grace Whitman, who lived between 1914 and 1995. This poem, Magnolias, is based on something that my mother told me, a story that she told me, probably more than once. It may have even been something that I asked her to tell me again. You know how that is. If you really are intrigued by a story, you say, tell me that story again about. Anyway, my mother was a registered nurse, an RN. She trained at St. Mary's in San Francisco. And when she was training, she lived with family friends in Millbrae. They had a small house in Millbrae. My mother lived there with them when she was going to nurses training. Rena and Merle Gillespie. Rena was about 15 years older than my mom. So Rena was kind of in between the age of my mother and grandmother, and a dear family friend. So this story that my mother related to me, every once in a while, the two women, my mom, she must have been in her early 20s, and Rena would get dressed up. They would get dressed up and go into the city, capital T, capital C, and those of you who have lived in the Bay Area know what that is. They would go into San Francisco for an adventure. They would go to the Mark Hopkins Hotel, to a rooftop lounge. I forget how many stories the Mark Hopkins was, but that lounge was called Top of the Mark. And my mom, when she told me this story, she said to me that their adventures were skylarking. She and Rena went skylarking.
Huh.
And for a long time, I thought that was some wonderful metaphor that she had made up. But when I looked it up, I found out it is a term that people use for when you pass the time by playing a trick or a little practical joke on other people. And not anything harsh or, but well, just the term skylarking. It's a lovely term. In this poem called Magnolias, the word swell occurs, used as a noun. And does everybody familiar with that? What a swell is? I see some heads nodding on the people on the row up that I can see. A swell is a wealthy, elegant person. And that was a term that was used definitely at the time when this incident my mother told would have occurred. Here's the poem. Magnolias. Black file suits skimmed at the waist, hats with a corolla of veil, gloves, pumps, daubs of the taboo they shared. One behind an earlobe, one at that wrist spot where mom's fingers had learned to count a pulse, one onto a nylon stocking's black seam, to scent the soft strip of skin behind a knee. Mom and Rena dressed fit to kill. Mom near the end of nurses training at St. Mary's, single and rooming with Rena and her husband, Merle, in their cottage under a huge magnolias shade. Early dusk, early winter fog, Rena and Mom skylarking on a cable car headed to San Francisco's swank Mark Hopkins Hotel, just in time to catch the cocktail crowd, gimlets in the top floor lounge where men hovered around them, a hand sliding along the marble bar to nudge toward the barkeep, money to cover their drinks. Tiger eye cufflinks winked from the swell's dress shirt, him murmuring, "My pleasure." Stardust, it's only a paper moon adrift from the piano. A second round, my treat this time, coming from another swell. Grabbing their purses, black clutch bags, they were off to the powder room, to pee, to wash their hands with musk blossoms of milled soap, to press new curves of red into their lips, pale powder onto their already milky skin. Leaving the ladies' room, they skirted the bar, unnoticed. They sidled out of the lounge, riding the elevator's long outtake of breath down to the lobby. A second or two to nudge elbows, to half swallow a laugh. They headed back. In Rena's front yard, a bud had opened. The tree kept up a year-round gala of broad gleaming leaves, a few tight folds of cream swelling even in December. Hands down gorgeous. Huge candle wax blooms steeped in lemony perfume. Top of the mark, a little harmless fun. Before anything had a chance to get out of hand, Mom and Rena gone. Petals fell on the clipped lawn, a scatter of crescent moons, their edges dark in winter sun.
That is gorgeous.
Thank you.
Gorgeous.
The second poem that I sent your way ahead of time is for my grandfather, Archie Theobald, who lived from 1890 to 1955. He was my maternal grandfather, and those maternal grandparents lived in Portland, where I grew up, in Northeast Portland. My grandfather was a furrier. He had a fur shop on Northeast Sandy Boulevard, the Alaska Fur Shop. And this poem about him alludes to the fact that the Oregonian was then the daily paper, and almost everyone got the Oregonian delivered daily to their door. At that time, when I was a little girl, that would have been in the early 50s, the comic strips were black and white except for Sundays. On Sundays, they were in color. There are allusions in this poem to the comic strips of the late 40s and 50s. Maybe you'll recognize some of their names. My grandfather, Archie, and my grandparents, my mother's parents, were so beloved to me. I just adored them. My grandfather, Archie, was paralyzed from the waist down. And that happened when I was about 2. So all of my memories of him are in his wheelchair. So I did, as I say, adore my grandparents, Archie and Anne, although I called my grandmother Nana. And often I stayed with them on the weekends. My parents let me do that. And not that I didn't love my parents, I did very much, but it was so wonderful to stay with my grandparents on weekends. So this is called Ritual, and it's for my grandfather, and it's spoken to my grandfather. Now, poets and prose writers who call this direct address. An indirect address, of course, the voice in the piece of writing is speaking directly to someone. So this is Ritual, spoken to my grandfather, who is, of course, has been dead for how long now? Oh, that's a long time. But I'll stop right here and say something to you that I say to people in workshops frequently. This is the wonderful thing about writing a poem or writing any piece of prose. You can do whatever you want. If you want to speak to someone who has been absent from your life for a long time, you can do that. Ritual. Sundays, you didn't work. Your fur shop silent. In its front window, the closed sign turned itself neatly toward the traffic on Sandy Boulevard. Any Sunday, I might have been staying with you and Nana there for the weekend. Every Sunday, the Oregonian arrived on your front porch, thick and weighted with the ink of extra ads. Sunday's comics were printed in color, Sluggo and Sparkle plenty, wearing deep, bright hues. We looked at the paper, you, the front section, me, parade and the comics. And when we were done, I carried its bulk away. In a stack by the back porch door, I found Saturday's paper, skimpy, and by then in slipshod folds curling at its edges. I turned to its comic strip page and smoothed it out on the chrome-edged kitchen table. I fetched your box of colored pencils, a whole Faber set with every basic color as well as the rare ones in between. In black and white, Saturday's comics were starkly drawn, each character and object outlined in ink. Those wan spaces in every panel waiting for us resident artists. Little orphan Annie got her red hair. Dick Tracy's suit shouldered its detective blue. Trees leafed out, skies cleared. In Prince Valiant's crown, the jewels grew precious. Veronica put on lipstick. Blondie bespoke her name. Now that I've lived for years beyond the age at which you died, I see more clearly than ever those Sundays. You sit at the kitchen table, me at your side, our heads together, bowed to our work. Your slacks are charcoal, your shirt beige, the metal parts of your wheelchair silver. In your fingers, a cigar gleams its bronzed brown, the lit end flaring into ember red each time you take a puff. As you exhale, your breath becomes the color of smoke. In slow swirls, it eases upward, meanders the air, leaving its trace below, that ghost of steel gray ash. And the third poem, well, this is also in direct address. This poem is spoken to someone with whom I went to high school at Franklin High School, Janice Nakata. She was 2 years older than I. I graduated in 1960. And of course, Janice would have graduated in 1958. At that time, and some of you may remember this or maybe even have experience with this, at that time in Portland, the public high schools had social clubs. And those social clubs were as much like sororities as possible, including with bids, with Pledge Week, with Hell Week, with pins, the whole thing. And as I understand it, not too long after I graduated from high school, the school board outlawed them, got rid of them, and there could only be service clubs after that. But at this time, there were these social clubs. Gulick was the name of the social club that both Janice and I belonged to. Janice, as you could probably assume from her last name, was Japanese American. She would have been born in 1940. 1940. So just a little reminder of some of the history of that time in our country. On February 19th, in 1942, that would be 79 years ago, Executive Order 9066 was issued by President Roosevelt. That was the executive order that sent all people of Japanese ancestry to relocation camps. And I'm sure I don't need to remind you that a relocation camp, that is a euphemism, because the people were imprisoned in those relocation camps with guard towers and barbed wire. So that little bit of history. Belated. And as I say, this is spoken to Janice. Belated. Janice Nakata, May Fate Queen, honor roll girl. I'm glad I was once your sister. If only in a high school club playing 1950s grown up with our bids and blackballs and pledge week, our pale organza formals, our long white gloves. Janice with skin the color spun from wild honey. Did you wince at me? The tall, thin one, blotched by moles and imperfection, admiring in silence your sweet-spoken ways, your darkest eyes that met our eyes with only kindness. I must have thought we'd all grown up much like me, with a father exempt from the army because he worked in the shipyards, a father left at home to weld, sealing those giant hulls bound for Pacific seas, a daddy free to build his daughter a wooden step stool, that exact size so she could reach the bathroom sink to brush her teeth, a dad who could drive her to see grandparents in their gabled house just across our tree-shaded city. Janice Nakata, beautiful sister, I ask you now what I did not know to ask you then. Tell me, where, in which makeshift barrack shadowed by high barbed wire, did we imprison your family during the war? Three poems from One Small Son. And what I would like to do, and I'm hoping with your help, is to use my poems as a bridge into your writing, a bridge into getting you primed, set up to do some of your own writing. Judy told me earlier via emails that we exchanged back and forth, Judy told me earlier that some of you are interested in memoir. Well, as you can tell, these poems, these lyric poems with stories to tell, are like little pieces of memoir. So let's use my poems as a kind of bridge or a springboard, and that's a word that I'll use more later on and talk to you more about later on, as a springboard into your own writing. So let's start with this. Let's talk a little bit about description. Let's talk about vivid description. Now, in those poems I just read to you, and maybe some of you are looking at them now, that's fine. But let's say Magnolias, that's the poem about my mother and Rena going skylarking. Is, if you close your eyes, is there something that you remember about Magnolias? Does something come to mind when you think of that poem? Anyone?
I just want to say I muted everybody, so you have to unmute to talk.
Oh, all right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm down here as mic 2.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
So it brought back memories of when I went with a couple of girlfriends to San Francisco, and we went to the top of the Mark and we stayed
Oh, did you
there.
go to the top of the mark?
And I hadn't even thought about that and how we were, it was in the 70s. So we were in our early 20s, yes. Yeah. And the poem just made me joyful. I mean, it just really made me happy. It brought back a lot of memories, and I had never, I'm a garden person, but I had really never thought about magnolias smelling like lemons. So you had a lot of weaving in there of lots of different emotions and different senses for me.
Thank you. All right, I appreciate it. And remember, and I can't see your name.
I'm Cheryl.
Sure, I see it now. Excuse me. In my bifocals, yeah, Cheryl. What she said about the lemony smell of the magnolias. So maybe that stays in her mind, and of course what it did wonderfully is trigger other memories for you. All right, so in Ritual, that's the poem about my grandfather and I coloring the funnies. Is there anything that kind of comes to mind for anyone else when you think of that poem? That's Pass. Oh my God.
We invited Lynn Pass, who was
Oh, Lynn.
I didn't know if you could see me yet.
yes,
Oh, why
hello,
can't I
Lynn.
just put my arms around you and give you a hug? Oh, it's so
I'm
wonderful.
giving you one back.
Oh gosh.
So just to remind other people, or to tell you, for some of you for the first time, so Paulann and Lynn and I, this trio who came around to give a lot of support and cheerleading to a young man who came to Westland High School in his senior year. And well, Lynn, do you want to describe just a little bit of this? And that, because it's part of this, what we're thinking about with Paulann, of who is in our past. When we think about that person with gratitude, and know that that person has had an interesting contribution in our lives and lives of people we know. So with that, just very briefly, Lynn, do you want to talk about that episode with Isaiel Sanchez?
Absolutely, yeah. So I don't remember exactly what year, but a wonderful young man came into my art classroom at the high school, and he was new and didn't know a lot of people. And he was just, you could tell, a wonderful human being and super creative, and just was a little lost at this new school. And so several of us, including Paulann and Judy here and myself, took him under our wing, and we wanted the best for him, and we wanted to help him as much as we could to feel at home and to feel validated in this new school with so many people that he didn't know. So we did. He was having some struggles and some issues. He was living with his sister, and he didn't know a lot of kids. And so we all just kind of, gathered around him. And at one point, I remember he stopped coming to class, and we were really concerned. And we all kind of took it upon ourselves to go find where he was. He was at work, and we actually, I think he wasn't at work, but we found his workplace and wrote him a note, said, "Where are you? We're worried about you." I don't know if you guys want to add to that a little bit.
Well, he didn't have a mom who was alive any longer.
Right.
And here he was. I don't think he had lived in the United States much before then.
No.
And so I don't even know how he developed his English language skills. So
I don't know either.
but you saw this budding visual artist, and Paulann, you saw that he had some skills to write poetry. And I'll leave it at that and let you carry on, Paulann, with Lynn being part of this now.
Oh, well, and I will go back to what we're doing, but just a brief note. My part in this story with this young man was much smaller than Lynn's and Judy's. It was really his visual art that was his huge passion. And, you know, it's, well, I know from other students for whom creative writing was a huge, you know, was the huge passion, that to say that that saved their lives at that point in their life, I don't think is hyperbole. I don't think that's exaggeration. And so, Lynn, what you did for him and so many other students is just so wonderful. And what Judy did, you two
Back at you guys.
oh gosh, wonderful.
Well,
Oh,
that's what he talks about in some of the messages that he has sent us recently.
Yeah.
Reconnected. That's exactly what he's talking about, Paulann.
It is.
Well, but okay.
He actually used the words, never think that you didn't make a difference in someone's life.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
And he became a videographer with the Marines, by the way.
Yeah.
Has-
Very successful.
Yeah.
Beautiful family.
Yes. Yes. And pays it forward with relatives and friends, kids.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely.
well, as we were talking about the poem Ritual, and I asked if there was any, say, like image in Ritual that stays in anyone's mind. And that's been, we've had an interlude, a wonderful interlude here. Going back, Ritual is the poem where my grandfather and I color the funnies on, you know, color one of the weekday funnies that were in black and white. So
Cool.
are there any images for any?
I liked your description of the color of the wheelchair.
Oh, thank
And
you.
then with the color of the cigarette smoke.
Thank you. That, and those are very related. That silver, that gray.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. And then
So,
be
Paul,
rated. Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to say that you and I have very similar memories, except I'm older than you are by about 6 years. But I'm beginning to see now when I'm having these memories like World War II, etc. I could be doing that, and I could change those into more poetic memories that I'm seeing. I could maybe word it in my head also. So maybe that will help me learn how to write.
Thank you. Hold that thought. That's a wonderful thought, a good thought. So Belated, that's the poem where I'm speaking to Janice Nakata. And by the way, at the end of the poem, it says, I ask you now what I did not know to ask you then. Tell me. And the fact is, and I know this from any number of Japanese families who part of their family, or, you know, they were in the family that was incarcerated at that time. Once they got out, they did not talk about it.
No, they did
The
not.
families, the adults did not talk about it. So I had no idea that any of this had happened to Janice. So, but anyway, in that poem, are there any images that kind of stay in your mind?
I love the description of her skin and her eyes and you admiring it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And she is so beautiful. Really, I've seen a photograph of her that was taken within the last 5 or 6 years. And oh, well, all right. So what stays in our minds? All writers want their writing whether it's prose, poetry, whatever, we all want it to stay for at least a while in a reader's mind or a listener's mind. All writers want to be able to create memorable description. How do you get memorable description? Well, here's one way. Writers depend on imagery. Now, that word imagery, imagery, if you looked it up in the dictionary, the first denotation would be something visual, a picture, an icon, an image, right? That makes perfect sense. That's absolutely true. But writers know that for them, for writers, there's more. For a writer, imagery includes all of the senses, all of the senses. Now, I'm going to say 5 senses, and I'm going to talk about just 5 senses. Although many people will tell you now that we do have 7, and I don't mean ESP. So we have sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. Those are the basic 5, but also kinesis, movement, that sense of movement, and also something that a lot of people call an organic sense of feeling inside. For instance, if I were to say the word queasy, does that create any kind of response in you?
Yes.
I bet it does. And yet it's not sight or sound or touch or taste, or, well, it can be taste or smell if you get sick enough. But that queasy sense. Anyway, but let's stay with the 5 senses. Writers depend on imagery, and writers depend on imagery that somehow represents all of this, if possible, all of the senses. A kind of academic definition of imagery, but it's a very good one, is the representation through language of sense experience, sensory experience. The representation through language of sensory experience. So let's very, very briefly look at those poems. And I think Joan's going to put them up on the screen for us. And why don't you start with Magnolias, Joan?
Okay.
Hey, Mike.
And actually, we may be able to look at this. Oh, this technology is so slick.
Yes.
Jenny,
Cool.
Jenny, something I don't quite understand it.
So we're going to be able to do this pretty quickly, I think. Is there sight
So,
images?
dinosaur lady, the daring discoveries. Can I be heard? Oh, sorry.
So the very first line, well,
Yeah.
the title, but the very first line has sight imagery: black file suit skimmed at the waist. And if you know what black file is, that fat, well, anyway, that, hats with a Corolla veil. This poem is loaded with sight imagery. Sound, I would say to you farther down here on the first page, I think, I would say to you that the very names of the songs, and you have them, here we go, yeah. Oh, it's different on yours, so you don't get it all. All right, so Stardust, It's Only a Paper Moon. Those are, for me, images. Don't go down quite so far, Joan.
Oh,
You're
sorry.
past it. The song titles, so back up just a little bit. There we go. Okay. Stardust, It's Only a Paper Moon, Adrift from the Piano. That's sound imagery. And I would argue that just the name of those songs, when I hear It's Only a Paper Moon, I hear some of that melody in my mind. It's only a paper moon. Da, 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 da. Anyway, so sight, sound, touch, definitely those perfume daubs on the back of the knee, that hand sliding along the marble bar to, you know, pushing the money toward the barkeep to pay for their drinks. And then taste and smell. Maybe you've never tasted a gimlet, but that's an image that has, you know, that has sensory, has a sensory element to it. The musk blossoms of, you know, the perfume soap. And then what Cheryl, I don't know if I'm remembering that name correctly, pointed out about the lemony perfume of the Magnolias, which is, they have the most wonderful scent. That is definitely both taste and smell. So this poem does contain imagery of all of those 5 senses, and maybe some of 6 and 7 too. Let's take a look at ritual. Joan, if you could put that one up on the screen. Here we go.
It's coming.
So this one too is full of sight imagery. From the second line of the poem, that sign, the closed sign in the front window of the fur shop. Sound imagery, the traffic out there on Sandy Boulevard. And I'm just pulling out a few. You could go through the poems and, you know, detail lots of different imagery. Touch. Now, touch is both tactile, as into what you feel when you feel a surface, but also temperature is part of touch, like you sense when it's hot or cold. Anyway, touch, that paper, thick and weighted with those extra ads, that's a touch image. The fact that we smoothed out that Saturday paper, that page that had the comics. Taste and smell, that cigar, that's a potent image for me. Then belated, if you would, please.
Whoops.
Joan.
Coming.
Oh, here we go.
Whoops. Thick.
Here we go. All right. Sight imagery. This one's full of sight imagery too, but you can just at the very first, those pale organza formals, the long white gloves, sound imagery in the poem. I think the one that I could find in there was the silence, the speaker, that would be me being, you know, so silently admiring her. Touch, the little stool so the girl could brush her teeth, the welding the ceiling of the ships, and of course taste and smell. Another image that somebody remembered, which was the wild honey of her skin. All right, so Joan, you can take the poems off there now. If you would, please.
I can do that.
All right, so imagery. What happens when you have good imagery is almost automatically you end up with details, specificity in what you want to say. And as writers, that's what we want. We want something so immediate, so alive, that it meets the reader, it meets the listener with such wonderful force, such wonderful resonance that it draws the reader, it draws the listener right into it. So what's going to happen is next week when we meet here, I am going to be, and you'll be able to sense this, you'll be able to tell it right away. I will be pointing you as I lead you through this springboard, I will be pointing you toward imagery, toward sight imagery, toward sound imagery, toward touch or feel imagery, towards taste and smell imagery. And you'll see next week the technique I'll use to nudge you, to coax you, to cajole you toward that. So what will we do next week? We are going to do something that I call a springboard. And if any of you have done any diving or any swimming, a swimming pool, you know what a springboard does. Why not just jump off the edge of the pool? Why use a springboard? Well, a springboard gives you momentum. A springboard gives you energy. A springboard gives you that oomph to take you up and put you into the water. So what I want to do is provide you with a springboard that is going to lift you into some pretty exciting writing. And what we'll do next week will be the first step of a springboard, which I call priming. Springboard is a metaphor, priming is a metaphor. And I love that idea of priming as a metaphor. Have any of you ever been around an old-fashioned hand pump?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And what do you have to do to get water?
Prime the pump.
Prime it.
You have
Put
to,
water in it.
and how do you prime it?
Put some water in it.
Thank you. Thank you. Most people say, you just pump really hard. You could pump really hard until kingdom come and not get any water. You have to pour water into it to get water. That's why next to an old-fashioned pump, you would always see a bucket or a tin can or something full of water. After you do water, then you fill that bucket or can so the next person could prime the pump and get water. Well, what we're going to do next week is a kind of priming. I'm going to get you started with what I'm hoping is going to be some wonderful material so you can launch yourself into even more wonderful material. We'll do this priming, this preliminary writing together next Monday. And then afterwards, you'll take your priming and let it lead you into a first draft of whatever. Now, what I do, the springboard that I'll do with you will not be genre specific. I am not going to be telling you to write a poem. I'm not going to be telling you to write a prose piece. How the form that your writing takes will be up to you. It might be a poem. It might turn out to be several poems. It might turn out to be part of a memoir. It might turn out to be part of a novel, a bit of creative nonfiction, a prose poem. Who knows? That will be up to you. So the form the writing takes will be up to you. But what I'm going to try to do is leave you next week, when we end our next week's session, with this treasure trove of wonderful material that you can work with. I've given many, lots of them after being Poet Laureate, to workshops in public libraries and other places. And I tell people, my desire is that you go staggering out of the workshop with the weight of all the new writing that you're going to do something with. So what will you need for next week? Of course, you're going to need your laptop or whatever you're using now so we can all tune into each other. But you're going to need paper and pen. I would recommend a clipboard simply because it's a hard surface, but maybe the way you're set up, the table surface is perfectly good for you to write on. You'll need a paper and pen or pencil, a clipboard, or maybe a notebook with a hard cover. Whatever you need to be able to work quickly and comfortably, because we will move quickly. And that's part of, well, it's kind of part of the plan, because if you're left to think too hard on your writing, what happens?
Bogged down.
Well, number one, people get stuck. They get, they kind of get blocked. They get stalled out is what I call it. But also, if you're working very slowly, it kind of leaves room for those critics to walk in.
Yes.
The little
Self-doubt.
critic, either one of your shoulder, and this little critic says, "Oh, for God's sakes, Paulann, this is dumb. Why are you writing this?" Or says, "Oh, for God's sakes, Paulann, you've got, this is, this will never do." What we do a week from today, you're not going to worry about spelling, for goodness sakes. You're not going to worry about grammar, for goodness sakes. You're just going to be jotting stuff down as quickly as possible, as much off the top of your head, or maybe the deep center of your head, your heart, your body, as possible. So whatever you need, well, you're going to want to be in a situation where you're going to be able to write quickly and comfortably. You get to do it however you want to do it, but truly, I do not recommend little diaries or, little journals. They're wonderful to have to carry around with you. But if you are wanting to write a lot and just getting a lot down on the page as quickly as you can, those little diary type journals or notebooks are kind of hard to work with. So paper and pen or pencil, favorite writing tools, whatever is going to be comfortable for you to write fast and copiously, and we are going to have a great time. I'm just excited thinking about it. So I don't know if I have begun to prime you adequately, or do people have questions? Or I think we're just about at an hour. I think, is that not the normal time for your get-togethers?
You're absolutely right on target. And say, Vicki,
I said, I'm really looking forward to this because I was one of those students who
my
would sit there
friends.
completely blocked and not knowing what to do because I was so fearful of being judged.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's very, very, very true. And we've just something that I cannot tell you how many times I heard this at West Lynn, in Klamath Falls, where I taught high school, all over Oregon. And I would hear, they would say, someone would say, I used to write poems. I used to write stories. I used to write plays, but then I stopped. I don't know why I stopped, but I just stopped. And it's that someone somehow put that very harsh critic inside you.
Yeah.
And that critic is just there saying, nope, not you. No, and that's BS is what that is.
Paulann, I have a quick question and a comment. First of all, I didn't realize how this would unite us. I was born and raised until 10 years ago, Cleveland, Ohio. You told the story of the Cleveland News and the Cleveland Press and of the comics. On everything you said was exactly like this Ohio. So you see, there's a tie. 3,000 miles away, would we ever think that? But your story did it.
That's wonderful.
Now, my other comment or question is, how do you feel about using keyboards instead of a pen?
You know,
Because-
and thank you, Marilyn. I should have had that in my notes. There are people who keyboard, that's how they compose, and people who use split screens, or they can just be
Okay.
listening to me. All you have to do is to be able to hear me throughout.
Okay. I have had 3 hand surgeries, so it becomes painful to write.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Yeah.
thank you for the answer. I appreciate it.
Definitely. Yeah, for everyone, if you prefer to keyboard, please do that. And I apologize. That's my error, my omission for not
No
saying
problem.
that when I was thinking about what you would need for next time.
Thank
Thanks.
you. This was so wonderful. Thank you,
Mhm.
Paulann.
So welcome.
Is this